Hello, friends. Welcome to New Hampshire Peace Action's Peace and Justice Conversation Series online. I'm Will Hopkins. I'm the director of New Hampshire Peace Action. If you are new to our organization, New Hampshire Peace Action educates, mobilizes, and organizes to build a more peaceful and just future for all. We envisage a future where international relations are based on cooperation instead of competition and conflict, and where mutual benefit and shared security lead to a more peaceful and just global community. So the corona pandemic spurred us to start this every other Monday conversation series almost 2 years ago now. And we found it so effective at doing our outreach. We found it so accessible that we've decided to continue it on indefinitely. And we're hoping this conversation series can help us engage and sort out how to make the changes that we're yearning for. In the spirit of understanding and respect, we'd like to acknowledge that we're doing our work here in New Hampshire and that we are on the traditional ancestral homeland of the Abenaki, Pennacook, and Wabanaki peoples, past and present. We want to honor with gratitude the land and waterways that they have been stewarding throughout the generations. Quick bit on Zoom etiquette. We're happy to have you keep your video on so we can see your faces and reactions and feel connected. We do ask that you keep your audio muted if you're not talking. The chat is a great place to share reactions and ask questions, which we'll get to. And when we do get there, I'll say a little bit about how to do the Q&A section. But first, we're going to hear from David a little bit. So David Grishaw-Jones is the pastor of the Community Church of Durham. He has a deep passion for justice and peace and a wish to challenge injustice at every turn. He sits on the UCC Peace with Justice Advocates team with me, which is the team that we work with on our Spirituality of Peacemaking and Ecosystems of Compassion series. He also sits on the National UCC Palestine-Israel Network Steering Committee. The Community Church of Durham is hosting the F-Word exhibition it began on May 1st. And it will be there for 2 weeks. So you've got a little while still to catch it at the community church. The Forgiveness Project, or F-Word exhibition, is a thought-provoking collection of arresting images and personal narratives exploring forgiveness in the face of atrocity. It draws together voices from South Africa, the US, Israel, Palestine, Northern Ireland, and England. And the exhibition examines forgiveness as a healing process, a path out of victimhood, and ultimately a journey of hope. I'm really excited to hear from David because he's someone who I've really enjoyed his insights working with him over the last couple of years. And we're all excited to have David on. So David, why don't you take it away? Tell us about the Forgiveness Project.
Well, thanks so much, Will, and back at you. I mean, it's one of the neatest things about coming back to New England after a long ways away is getting to know new friends and allies and build new collaborative relationships. And I'm so glad to be doing that with Will, and really glad Will's going to get a little bit of a sabbatical this summer as well to recharge his batteries. It's great to be with you tonight, and I was asked to talk a little bit and to be in conversation with you around ideas and practices related to forgiveness and mercy in connection with the Forgiveness Project, this F-Word exhibition that is here at the church in Durham the beginning of May. And it's my understanding that this conversation tonight is building off of several others that you've had over the last several months with folks like Becky Field and Joel Berman around compassion and the practices of compassion and how they bear on our work to build a better world. And I just want to say at the outset, and again, I hope all of this is leading to some lively conversation among us, that I'm really drawn to Joel's notion of the ecosystem of compassion, or ecosystems of compassion, and this idea that that whether it's compassion, forgiveness, mercy, justice, peace, the combination of all those things really do require ecosystems that nurture and inspire and sustain the good work that we're doing. And as a pastor, Joel, I know Joel's with us, I just find that notion really, really significant, important, and affirming. That I think of my life as a pastor, or if I was a rabbi, I'd think of my life as a rabbi as being someone who's building community, and building not just any kind of community, but building a community that can imagine and enact justice and compassion. And I think we're at a point in this country where we need to bring new energy and new resolve to that project, to the project of building communities that can imagine and sustain compassion and forgiveness. And that's very much what you all do with New Hampshire Peace Action. It's what we try to do in church life and synagogue life, and I think there's a great urgency to that work right now. So I am no expert, obviously, in forgiveness, and in fact, as I just walked through this stunning exhibit again this evening, and read through these 18 remarkable stories that are depicted in this exhibit, I realize how much of a novice I am when it comes to the practice of forgiveness and mercy. And I don't really think the point of this exhibit is to pretend that there is a way of becoming expert in forgiveness either. I think the point of this exhibit, and some of you could speak to this more eloquently than I, the point of this exhibit is to inspire and agitate us into conversation around how we move into and with and in the midst of conflict, and what kind of gifts and imagination we can bring to the significant conflicts that we're living with now. And the answers aren't always easy. The answers are rarely easy, usually require deep struggle and in some cases a long period of time for folks to imagine what forgiveness, what mercy, what reconciliation might look like. So all that's to say that we're going to talk a little bit tonight about how forgiveness, mercy, compassion, how these things relate to our ongoing work for justice and peace. And that's really one of the questions that I'm bringing to this month's exhibit and to the many conversations that we're having at the church is, and what does forgiveness have to do with justice? I mean, I like to think of myself as an activist, as a person who's working in many ways and in many arenas towards a just world and a peaceful world. Does forgiveness have anything to do with that? Does mercy have anything to do with justice? It's a question that we're turning around. I want to believe that the answer to that question is yes, that justice is related, is emboldened by merciful action and merciful hearts. But I think these stories that we've been hosting these last several weeks raise some really good questions about that question. What's the relationship between forgiveness and justice? All kinds of other questions have come up as well. What I'd like to do, Will and Amy, if I could, is to show folks this 6-minute video, which I think will give you a feeling, a taste of the stories that we've been living with and hosting over these last couple of weeks. And it's about a 6-minute video. It comes out of the Forgiveness Project itself. And I think it'll give us all a feel for the kinds of stories that they're asking us to hold and to reflect on this month. So we can watch this for just a few minutes.
On February 12th, 1993, I received a call that no parent wants to receive. Hatred began when, and I found out who had taken Lorraine Mann's life. I think it started then. And I'm a Christian woman, and I was just full of hatred. I didn't like anybody at that time. I was mad and upset with everybody. Like I said, I viewed him as an animal when we started going to court, and I just wanted him to be locked up for the rest of his life because I thought, hey, you know, you just shouldn't have done this to my child. And hate just kept coming and coming and coming. You know, the more I'd go to court, and the way things would go in court too, I don't know, I just hated everyone. My family, they started off coming with me, but they didn't continue. After the trial, I got this Two Mothers poem, and it was about two angels in heaven, and because of the crown they wore, they both knew they were mothers here on earth. And so they were talking about their son. The one mother said, I would have taken my son's place on the cross if I could have. And the other mother fell on one knee, and the mother of Christ, the mother fell on one knee, and she said, oh, you are she, the mother of Christ. So the mother of Christ lifted her, kissed a tear from her cheek, and said, now tell me of your son, so I may grieve with you. And she said, my son is Judas Iscariot. And the poem just ended there. And I read it the second time, and I heard within myself, I want mothers of murdered children and mothers of children that have taken life to come together and heal. I kept hearing this thing over and over and over and over. This is what you're to do. This is what you're to do. So I finally decided, if I'm going to do that, I need to go to prison and make sure that I have forgiven him. Because if I haven't, there's no way I'll be able to deal with these mothers. I got halfway up the ramp, and I broke down. I said, I can't do it. God, I am not ready. But I'm so thankful that he says he'll send us out 2 by 2, because Regina was behind me and she just pushed me up the ramp. And we got inside, and I had to go clean up my face. Then we went through the metal detector. I'd never been in prison before. Him and I had shook hands, and I told him, look, I don't know you. You don't know me. You didn't know my son, and my son didn't know you. And I said, we need to lay a foundation. We need to get to know one another.
What really put me at ease is, like she said, when I walked in and we started to have a meeting, she started with, I don't know you, you don't know me, my son didn't know you, didn't know my son, so let's start from square one. And, you know, I want to learn about you. That's the thing that really made it comfortable and easy, because instead of attacking, she wanted to know about me.
He agreed to meet with me again, and then we shook hands. And then he asked if he could hug me, and I said yes. And we walked around the table, and we hugged, and they say I was hysterical. I don't remember that part. But I know I began to fall, and I know that he held me up. I mean, he could have dropped me or anything, but he held me up. And I believe that that is where some bonding began to take place. And when he left the room, I was bent all over saying, you know, I just hugged the man that murdered my son. I just hugged the man that murdered my son. I began to feel something in my feet, and it just began to just move, and it moved up and up and up until I felt this thing leave me. And I instantly knew that all the hatred, the bitterness, the animosity, the anger, I instantly knew that all that stuff was gone, that it was over with. In March of 2010, right here in this space, we gave him a welcome home party. My organization and we have some nuns, Catholic nuns, that live in the hood. They participated. And we had about 30 people that welcomed him home and told him how they could help him.
I don't know, you go through a growth process, I guess. Everyone reaches their growth process at different stages, different ages. mine just happened to hit one day. I just happened to wake up, had an epiphany, like, how I was living my life was a lie. It wasn't really who I was. So it was a process. It was definitely a process. It's still one that I go through now, but I'm in a better place of understanding myself now, understanding what triggers are and things of that nature. So in order for me to really take steps towards saying that I was a man, I had to do those things. I had to look this lady in her eye, and tell her what I had done. When people hurt us, cause us some kind of pain or make us feel a certain type of way, and we carry it on, what happened is more things happen and more things begin to feed that pain. And it's like anytime you feed something, it grows. You continue to feed it, it grows. So if you continue to hold on to pain and other pain is coming, it continues to grow and grow and grow. But if you learn how to let it go, to not take it personal, to forgive whoever said this or done that to you, then you pretty much begin to starve that pain. And anytime you starve something, it dies. So forgiveness is pretty much saying, I give up holding on.
Thanks, Will and Amy, for putting that on. I think that gives you a feeling for what the Forgiveness Project is about, and the questions that the Forgiveness Project is raising, and the encouragement that the Forgiveness Project is offering to us in our own local settings. I should say that Andrea LeBlanc is on the call with us tonight, and she's here on the Seacoast and has been very much a part of the Forgiveness Project for a long, long while, and an inspiring presence in this community in so many ways, and has encouraged us to host this project a couple of different times over the years. And we're very grateful to Andrea for her leadership and for her inspiration on that. So I just want to offer a couple of thoughts, and then invite you all to sort of chime in with questions that come up for you around this relationship between forgiveness, compassion, mercy, and justice. If you check in the chat, I put one of my favorite quotes in the chat from a French theologian whose name is Claude de Coq, and he says this about forgiveness. I think it's a really interesting and telling quote. He says, "Forgiveness is an invitation to imagination. It is not forgetfulness of the past, but rather the risk of a future other than the one imposed by the past or memory of the past." It's kind of dense language, but I want to read it again because I think there's a lot here that we could begin to unpack together in conversation. "Forgiveness is an invitation to imagination. It is not forgetfulness of the past, but rather the risk of a future other than the one imposed by the past or memory of the past." And, as I think about that last 6-minute conversation and all of the other stories that are represented here in Durham this week, I think folks differ in many, many ways. They differ about what forgiveness is, whether forgiveness is even possible, really. But in almost every case, what they're doing with their lives is imaginative. It is taking a very, very painful moment and loss, and even acts of violence that they've experienced, and they are somehow turning those experiences and those losses into an imaginative moment, a moment where a new relationship can be imagined. The relationship between the mother and the young man in that video, they had to imagine that, the two of them, I think, not just her, but I think they had to have the courage and the curiosity necessary to imagine a different kind of relationship and a different kind of a future, not the future that was imposed on them by the past and all that the past had meant and had done and had involved, but a future that was unfettered and shaped by mercy, justice, and grace. Again, forgiveness sometimes seems a little too cheap, or like a word that just doesn't quite capture what we're really getting at here. And I'm not sure exactly what that word is. I love the word mercy. I love the word justice, and I'm still kind of struggling to sort of name the connections between them. But I love this notion in this quote that forgiveness is an invitation to imagination. I don't think I'd ever, until recently, I don't think I'd ever put those two words together, forgiveness and imagination. But as I think about all the things that are going on in my world and your world right now, that seems so completely busted, so completely broken, and so completely wrong, whether it's the Supreme Court's off the rails stuff, or what's happening in Ukraine, or racism entrenched and run amok in this country, whatever it is. I think what you and I can bring to all of those crises is an imaginative spirit born of mercy and compassion. And again, I'm not sure that there's any quick fix in any of that any of this is sort of quick fix business, but it does have something to do with our imagination, and not just mine or yours, but ours, our being communities of people who can imagine together what a different, healed, just, compassionate, merciful world looks like. And in that sense, I think these two folks in the video we just watched offer us just a kind of a glimpse of what that might look like, and how can we do that on even a larger scale and a different plane. I think lastly, and then I just want to open it up to you. I just want to offer something I've been turning around in my brain over these last several years, and it relates to another word that is sometimes baffling and confusing to me, and I think baffling and confusing to the church, and that's power. And maybe you didn't expect to be hearing anyone talk about power tonight in a conversation about forgiveness, but I think we need to, in the peace movement, in the church, in the religious world, I think we need to reimagine power, or we need to embrace new or prophetic notions of power. And you can tell me whether this makes any sense to you. The most obvious kind of power that we see playing out in our politics and our international affairs, and even in local communities right now, is coercive power, the kind of power that I use to get my way, or the kind of power that I use to leverage my gender and my size to get my way, or the kind of power I use to leverage my educational background to convince others that my way is the right way. Whatever. Coercive power is almost always the power that we see playing out in our politics and all these other arenas. But I think there's another notion of power that is, again, I think, born and shaped in this discussion of forgiveness and mercy and compassion, and that's, for lack of a better phrase, I might call it the second power, relational power. It's the kind of power that you and I develop together when we love one another, connect to one another, care about one another, and sometimes forgive one another. Those two folks in that last little video, and I'm sorry that I can't recall their names just now, but there's a kind of power in their relationship that they can then take into their neighborhood and into their city and into their church and into the problems that they face in that part of Minneapolis. There's a kind of relational power that they are developing, that they are cultivating, that I think is something like the way, for lack of a better phrase, to healing and justice in the world. Can't we all acknowledge that coercive power is bereft, right? It's bereft of imagination. It's bereft of love. It hasn't worked, and it's not working, and it's bringing us all to our knees now. But relational power, and I'm seeing so many faces on the screen here who know exactly what this is and practice it. It's what Joel's doing with the Compassionate Listening Project. It's what Andrea's been doing for years. relational power, the power that comes from our forgiving, loving, compassionate relationships, that kind of power is very, very different, and I think can lead us to change that is good for all of us. It's still power, because it's still, I think relational power still offers us the capacity to do difficult things, to do very difficult things, to go to the halls of power and ask and demand for difficult things. But it's not a power of, it's not the power of coercion or muscle or violence. It's Gandhi's power, I think, and King's power, and the power of the nonviolent prophets who've gone before us. So as I walk through this forgiveness project this week and last, that's what I'm thinking about. I'm thinking about, what do these stories and these practitioners have to say to me and to my friends here in New Hampshire about our practice of power, our practice of politics, and the kind of love and forgiveness we can bring into the political arena, not to get rolled over, because I think we don't deserve to be rolled over. We have the capacity, and we should have the power to act and to make change. But it's a different kind of power than Donald Trump's bluster, and it's a different kind of power than Ron DeSantis's nastiness, and it's a different kind of power than Marjorie Greene's snarkiness. It's the kind of power that comes when you and I love one another and care enough about one another to do hard things together. And I think that's what these practitioners of forgiveness are asking us to do and to be. So I'm going to stop there, and I just would love to hear what all of that, I'm not sure if any of it makes any sense or made any sense, but I'd love to hear kind of what kind of questions or your own stories that come up, or maybe you're struggling with a particular moment around forgiveness and conflict in your own journey. We're a rather small group tonight, so we can take some time to listen to one another. What's on your minds and hearts?
So, and I'll get to you in a second, Michael, but I just want to say for Q&A, you can feel free to use the hand raise function like Michael's doing right now, or you can put an asterisk in the chat and I'll call on you. If you're feeling shy, don't want to talk, I think when it's a small group, it makes a lot of sense to unmute and ask your own questions. But if you prefer not to, you can feel free to just type your questions in the chat and I'll read them aloud for David to respond to. So Michael, go ahead.
The question I have deals with the Western world and settler colonialism. So when we came from Europe, here to North America, to Australia, South Africa, quite a few places, we used our power, in a sense, to break the spirit of the locals. And now they have been instructed they need to forgive us, and they'll be better off and healthier if they can just forgive us for our ancestors' crimes. And there's something similar going on in Israel, I think, with the Palestinian situation, that there was so much land that was appropriated for the state of Israel that had been farmed by Palestinians, and now they no longer are able, in many cases, to cultivate that land. And they're told just, well, you need to learn how to be more forgiving. And so I don't know where I'm going with this, but at what point does recompense or what do you call reestablishing the lost product of the relationship start the process of forgiveness?
Yeah, I think that those are great, a couple of really great questions, Michael, and those are exactly the questions that are coming up for us as we live with these 18 stories this week. And I think I hear these storytellers saying very much what you're saying, which is that the language and the rhetoric of forgiveness is not always sufficient to the task in front of us, right? And I think you're right. And again, if I can sort of call on my own training and my own community's traditions, which sort of come out of the prophetic biblical tradition. In that tradition, we talk even more than forgiveness. We talk about restoration and reparation. Making right what's what's wrong, repairing relationships that have been abused or broken, and I think you're exactly right. Forgiveness can be used to perpetuate, in some ways, those old grooves rather than transform them. And we want to be looking, again, this is the imagination part. I think we want to be looking for what the future might be that we're called to enact, and I think it's a future of reparations, restoration. That's why I love this notion of, and the practices around restorative justice. So not just forgiveness. I think is a part of that, or can be a part of that, but it's not all of it. What does it mean to heal and restore communities? And as you mentioned, in some ways, communities that have been colonized, settled, destroyed over long periods of time. The task is huge and requires, I think, enormous sensitivity, compassion, and again, great imagination. I really appreciate the question. What else comes up for you around, either around the video or any of these topics? Forgiveness, mercy, compassion, justice. Does it have anything to do with justice? Again, this notion that Joel's raising about ecosystems. What does it mean to create communities that can hold these questions and these possibilities together?
Go ahead, Chris.
One of the things that strikes me in so much of the foreign policy issues that we in Peace Action are concerned about is that so much, especially on the part of the U.S. foreign policy, is based on grudges and resentment about something that happened. Oh, it could be a century ago, it could be a couple decades. We look at Iran and the Iranian Revolution, and we just can't bear to forgive them for that. We look at what Cuba has done in setting up a socialist alternative right in our backyard, and that's unforgivable. So I wonder how this effort to come to some kind of forgiveness and some positive relation, how do we proceed in international policy terms? Because it seems to be there's a willingness that's required. And when, let's say, we're looking at what happened in Cuba, we're not looking for forgiveness or anything. We're just looking to stamp out the people that offended us and any of the people that have supported that. Same with Iran. So there seems to be a step that's required that, in terms of foreign policy, we're not even willing to consider that it needs to be there. So are there ways that we can approach some of these foreign conflicts, these national resentments of one group against another, to get us in a relational kind of frame of mind, so then we can go ahead with that?
Yeah, these are really great questions, and I share them with you. And the notion of forgiveness, reconciliation, restoration on a global scale or on a international scale is obviously very different, or somewhat different from what it looks like within our families or within our churches or within our neighborhoods, but equally important. The only thing that does come to mind, Chris, and that I think about in terms of my own work, is that I think how we deal with conflict, resentment, and forgiveness in our own personal lives and within our families and churches and neighborhoods and synagogues and towns does impact our life on another level. As we become active in peace movements, as we become active in international issues and pay attention to, I think there is a relationship between spirituality in our immediate surroundings and our immediate relationships and the health of those relationships, and how we deal with resentment in those most intimate places, and then our ability to entertain bigger visions for the globe as well. I think we have to take care of ourselves, and we have to do our work, our spiritual work, in order to do that larger work as well, if that makes any sense. But these are big questions that we're asking.
So I actually wanted to respond to that a little bit too. I do want to read Kay Morgan and rephrase that question a little bit and maybe expands on it a little. And Kay says, forgiveness seems to be a very intimate act between two people. How do we translate that process to larger groups and communities?
Yeah.
And I don't know that I'm responding to it. That doesn't mean I'm answering it. And my response is when we talk about forgiveness, I know that something that I've yearned for a really long time is forgiveness from the Iraqi people who were affected by my time in Iraq. I haven't gone there. I haven't asked for that forgiveness, but it's something that it's always on my mind in my peace work, that I'm doing this in part as a part of it that's penance, and that I really, really want to know that I can be forgiven for what I did and what I was a part of. And I don't know how we expand that from the one to the other, but I feel like if I can find a mother or somebody who lost because of what I did and tell them that I'm sorry and get forgiveness, that is healing some part of the damage that I did.
Yeah. Just amen, Will. I mean, I think that's just everything that we want our communities, whether it's Peace Action or a local church, to be, a place where folks like you can say things like that to a group of people who are understanding and can encourage you to do just what you're intending to do. I think that's you set an example for the rest of us as you even name that. Yeah, I would say too, Kate, to the answer to your question, and not to answer your question, but just to sort of riff on a little bit, that we need more experiments, right? We need more experiments. I mean, we've got plenty of scientific experiments going on in the world. We need more experiments, Gandhi's experiments in the truth, right? We need more experiments in truth and reconciliation, like they've been trying to do in South Africa, and the kind of experiments that Will's describing there for someone who's returned from Iraq and is trying to sort of figure out how to deal with that experience. We need to hear about these experiments. We need to encourage these experiments. The local sort of victim offender reconciliation projects that happen around the country in local settings. We need to see and hear about these experiments and cherish them when they go right.
Amy?
Thanks. Wow, this is an amazing conversation, and I also, in the spirit of response versus answer, I just had a few thoughts come to me. One is, from what Michael was saying earlier, I think it's interesting that there can be ways that we even use nice concepts and nice language to further push people around, right? Like to tell people it would be better for you to forgive. Yeah. Doesn't really seem very much in the spirit of what we're talking about, right? Versus asking for or offering forgiveness and working for justice. So to be careful of kind of that, like I think of like greenwashing and things like that. Like, when is it real and when is it just another way to use power over people? Right. And then the other thing, in terms of this idea of a larger scale, I just wanted to share. I've been reading work by Donna Hicks. She's has a dignity model. Some of you know, we're going to do a program on her later, so in the summer. And she was telling a story about her and Archbishop Tutu doing some work in Northern Ireland. And they had this program where they had people come together from both sides of the conflict publicly. It was on the BBC. And the idea was that it was very personal. She specifically told about a British policeman who'd been shot by an IRA member, and 25 years later, they were brought together. And the conversation they had, again, with broadcast, and that was a way to kind of, for those who couldn't have that direct conversation, that they could live it anyway, in a way. And it really, the stories are just beautiful and really open one's heart and, make me think, who can I go apologize to, that really, you like feel that place and you are opened up to want to live that way too.
Yeah.
And so those experiments are happening. They're not happening enough, but they're also, when they're happening, they're not getting talked about enough. So just to kind of put out there, and we know other folks here who work Compassionate Listening Project and other ways to do this kind of work and to see the magic that absolutely happens when people can move into that space. So I just want to share.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. By the way, it's very much at the heart of the 12-step movement as well. So there are experiments happening all the time in 12-step rooms around the world where folks are doing this moral inventory and making a real intention around making things right with folks that they've harmed in some way.
So, David, for those of us who aren't going to make it down to the Seacoast to see the exhibition, what are the? Can you maybe just share one or two of the stories that are shown that you found impactful as you've hosted the exhibit?
Yeah. And by the way, on their YouTube channel, and you can just Google Forgiveness Project, but on their YouTube channel, they've got many of these stories, not just this one we saw tonight, but many of them lined up and in some longer formats as well. And some of them are much longer formats where you can really watch a conversation. And I think that's it's really helpful for me because these aren't cookie cutter, as you've all been noting, they're not cookie cutter experiences. Each situation is different. Each conflict is shaped by different factors, and each person has to sort of figure out what to do with that conflict in their own way and at their own pace. And anyway, so their YouTube channel and their website, the Forgiveness Project, I think is easy to find, and it's really worth spending some time with. In fact, thanks for asking the question, Will, because on Sunday at 1:00 in the afternoon, Andrea and I are going to host a conversation online during which three of the folks whose stories are told come together to talk with us about their stories and their own journeys with forgiveness, mercy, and all the rest. I'll just tell you who those three folks are, and then I'll share the link. You're all invited to register and to join us if you want. Father Michael Lapsley is an Anglican priest. He was born and raised in New Zealand, I believe, but migrated to South Africa. Very, very involved in the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa. And in 1990, just after Nelson Mandela was released from prison, Father Lapsley opened a letter bomb that was sent to him by white nationalists and lost his two arms and one of his eyes in that bombing. And he tells a story. He's one of these folks who tells a story in which he's struggling still 30 years later to figure out whether he can forgive and who he might forgive. He doesn't know who did it, and he still struggles with the language of forgiveness. But what he has done with his life since 1990 is he's devoted himself to creating settings where others who have experienced physical and violent trauma in their bodies and in their lives can come together to heal a little bit from those memories. He's doing some really, really good work around the world, including in South Africa, around the healing of trauma. So that's Father Michael Lapsley. Robbie Damelin is in Tel Aviv, I believe, Israel, Palestine. Her son was serving in the Israeli military at a checkpoint and was shot and killed by a Palestinian sniper. She was already involved as an advocate for Palestinian causes before that point, but has sort of redoubled those efforts and works now for the Parents Circle, which is a group of parents, both Palestinian and Israeli parents, who come together to share their own experiences and to see if there are other ways for them to tap into those experiences to make justice happen for Palestinians and Israelis. So those are a couple of the kinds of stories that are being told. There are others. There are U.S. stories as well. A father whose son in San Diego, I believe, was shot and killed, who has made a connection with the killer's grandfather and a deep relationship. They go on speaking tours together to talk about restoring relationships and building a better world for their kids and grandkids. So each of the stories is really so unique and so different. But again, I'll put the link in for Sunday's conversation at 1. It should be really extraordinary. Andrea knows these folks so closely. She's a good friend of these folks. I'm just getting to know them, but their voices, their stories are profoundly interesting and deep, and I think instructive for us. Let me find that link before I forget.
All right. I'm not seeing more in the chat right now. It sounds like such a fascinating exhibit, and I've really enjoyed the reflections. In particular, the struggle. Most of the people on this call are of European ancestry, living on land that is the result of genocide, and asking for forgiveness is hard when there's no one left to ask. And the colonizer's perspective on forgiveness and making sure that we're not asking too much of the victims, and it's all relevant to how we struggle to end those sorts of oppressions. So
Will, just one more thing, and
yeah.
John Buttrick and others on this call are far wiser than I theologically, but in our Christian tradition, when we talk about forgiveness, it's not just forgiveness for the little tiny remarks, or there's a notion biblically around forgiveness in which the most important thing we can forgive are the debts that are accrued over time by some at the to the benefit and to the enrichment of others, right? That was the Jesus prayer was, forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. He was really concerned with the kind of forgiveness that acknowledges inequities in our economic system and inequities in our political system, and making those right, and addressing the systemic things that impoverish generations of folks and enrich generations of other folks. So I think there's something interesting there for us to wrestle with as we move along, is how do we expand this notion of forgiveness to include some of those other things that aren't just the, anyway, you know what I'm talking about. There's a sense in which a prophetic community wants to sort of really address the systemic stuff that gets in the way, and that we need to also kind of maybe forgiveness isn't the right word for that, but it was the word that Jesus used.
I want to just call attention to what Andrea said in the chat while you were speaking just now. When visiting Japan and also Vietnam, I was struck by their ability and willingness to forgive the U.S. And I've heard that from members of Vets for Peace who've gone back to Vietnam, that the people there wanted reconciliation, wanted to forgive, wanted to have a relationship. And it gives me courage to someday actually take this pilgrimage to Iraq that I've wanted to do since before I started at New Hampshire Peace Action. It's been a long time since I had the idea that I at some point want to go back to Iraq and find the people whose lives were affected by me. So it gives me a little that comment from Andrea just gives me a little hope that I can go and that I can have the kind of reconciliation that I want.
Yeah.
So thank you. Well, not seeing too many questions in the chat at this point. I think maybe we should start moving towards closing out. I want to say thank you so much, David, for a really, really rich discussion on this concept of forgiveness. Chris, why don't you go ahead, and then I'll close us out.
Well, one thought I've had about forgiveness when I think about, there's some family things going on that have involved a need for forgiveness. And it's just occurred to me when I try to dig into what's going on and what's to do about it, that forgiveness is a terrifically it's a completely creative act. You're taking the factors of what happened and how somebody has reacted to it and whatever has built on that, but you're bringing in a whole new, you're creating something. It's a work of, well, I guess if it's carefully done, it could be a work of art of some sort, but it's creating something that is not there before. The whole tensions and the reactions and the motivations for whatever happened, you're adding something completely new to that formula. So it's a challenge to be, in a sense, if you want to look at it in artistic terms, it's a challenge to be artistic, to make something new where this factor was not there before. You want to make something new.
Imagination, creativity.
I like that a lot, and maybe that distinguishes if it's simply replicating the past, or if it's not creative and imaginative and bringing us to a new place that is more just and more peaceful. It's not forgiveness. It's just the groove that we're in. So I like that a lot, Chris. Thank you so much for that.
So another comment from Andrea. She says, also, I think not forgiving becomes a sort of a prison. I get that. That resonates with me a lot. I want to encourage everybody on the call to continue this discussion. Actually, one week from today. Usually the conversation series is every other Monday, but a week from today, we're going to be doing the film All of Us. And Amy, Andrea, and David, who are all on and have participated tonight, are going to be co-hosting and running that discussion of the film. And then 2 weeks after that, or no, I'm sorry, 1 week after that, May 23rd. So it's May 16th. And you can sign up through New Hampshire Peace Actions events. May 23rd, we'll be hosting Curie Peterson Smith, who's working with Phyllis Bennis at the New Internationalism Project at the Institute for Policy Study. These are people who do a lot of reading and thinking about how to make good, sane foreign policy that leads to less death. So join us for that. We've got our annual meeting coming up on June 5th. That's going to be an in-person event, and we don't have Wi-Fi there. It's going to be outdoors. And I'll be cooking. So I hope some of us can make it to Bear Brook State Park on June 5th for that. But if you can't, the next day, Scott Dickman, who I think is also on the call, if I'm not mistaken, I thought I saw him at the beginning, maybe not, is going to be doing a film and discussion, Israel and the de facto annexation, a film and discussion. So, keep with us. We've got program on June 9th, June 20th. So there's a lot coming up. And we've got a few comments in the chat that I want to make sure that's places where you can go to find out more about those events. Thank you so much, David, for being with us tonight. Really appreciate you talking about it. It's such a great part of our work to focus on for an evening. Amy, did you have something you wanted to add, or just clapping? Got it. All right. Well, thank you all. Have a great night.
Thanks, everybody.
All right. Not a ton of people. I mean, small group. So not a ton of people jumping in. That's sometimes that's hard for me, like to know what to do when there's nothing. Like you can't really let there be silence. So do you move to end it early, or do you just babble? Like if there's something meaningful to say, I like to jump in with it, but I was running a little low.
I thought it went fine. I
All
thought
right,
you
good.
did a great job of adding some things, letting there be a little space, letting folks step into it. I mean, we ended what, like 2 minutes early, so it all came
Yeah.
together.
Oh, speaking of which, we're still live